It's so nice to see so many faces here tonight. We're gathered here tonight to celebrate the launch of Manipulating the Message, How Powerful Forces Shape the News by Cecil Rosner. We'd like to thank, yes.
Such an awesome turnout for a literary event here in the city. And I want to congratulate Cecil on this amazing launch. Congrats, especially because this is like 3 times as many people who were at my last book launch. And in addition to that, you've got like the who's who of CBC Manitoba over the years, you know. I think I saw Terry McLeod here somewhere. And, oh yeah, here we go, right there. All sorts of reporters and producers and journalists over the years. So it's a testament to the career that Cecil built in the public service of delivering quality journalism here in Manitoba. And the reason why it was important for me to come out is I work with his son. His son is actually my chief of staff. And so we have many connections. Working with Mark, I could say that Cecil and Harriet have done an amazing job in cultivating a family that are kind-hearted, good-natured, and moral people of the highest caliber. And that's why I'm so excited to hear about the book and to get a chance to read it, because I know that working with Cecil for a few years, one of the things that I always took out of it, and I'm sure that Carolyn and everyone who's here having worked with Cecil over the years would testify to the same thing, is that Cecil always put the ethics of journalism first and foremost each and every day on the job. And in the current media landscape and the cynicism that seems to permeate so much of our culture today, to have somebody who defines their career with an eye towards the public good and upholding the highest standards of integrity in the use of journalism as a lever to hold the powerful to account, other than newly elected NDP governments. It's certainly something that I think we can all get behind. So I'm so thrilled to be here and really want to congratulate you, Cecil. All the best.
Thank you. Holding power to account, that is what I think of when I think of Cecil Rosner. He's been a journalist for more than 4 decades. Most of you know him personally. He's written 3 books, including one that helped free a man that was wrongfully accused and spent 23 years in prison. Of course, we're talking about David Milgaard. Cecil's worked for the Winnipeg Free Press. He spent 31 years at CBC Manitoba. That is where I knew Cecil. He was my boss, of course, and he led the investigative team. He's very supportive of investigative journalism. He was an advocate for investigative journalism, still is an advocate for that. He teaches an investigative journalism course at University of Winnipeg. He's also one of the smartest, kindest human beings that I know. He questions things, he listens respectfully, even if you have differing opinions. When he retired, it was during the pandemic, and so we couldn't have an in-person goodbye. So we had to do it over Zoom. I cannot tell you how many people were on this Zoom call. There were hundreds of people who willingly joined this Zoom call. And they were waiting in line, a lot of people waiting in line just to tell him what he means to them professionally, but also personally, because he's just that kind of a guy. As a boss, he was always very supportive, but he'd also call you on your bullshit, which I think is super important for journalists. He really held us to account also. Cecil never shied away from tough conversations or asking tough questions. If you know him, you know he's a whiz at chess. He's also won countless journalism awards, including a Commissioner and a Gemini Award. Now, you'd also think that Cecil is good at everything, but apparently he's not a very good cook. His son says that his recipe for Spanish rice was not great growing up, but that he makes bagels now and they are very good. Did you know that he's also good at magic tricks? Yeah, me neither. But what he is best known for is journalism, honesty, and integrity. His latest book is called Manipulating the Message, How Powerful Forces Shape the News. Now, Cecil's mantra was always, how do you know that? As a journalist, when you pitch a story or when you tell him some of the research that you've done, he would always say, well, how do you know that? That's part of his investigative methodology that helps guide his journalists towards the truth, despite powerful interests who might be steering us in another direction. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce my mentor and one of the greatest human beings, Mr. Cecil Rosner.
So I wanted to say that it's very fashionable these days to hear people talking about misinformation and disinformation. I'm sure you've heard a lot of that kind of talk. If you listen to some experts, you might even think it's some kind of new development. Some people blame the internet, some people blame Donald Trump or social media or foreign bots or conspiracy theorists sitting in their basements pumping out fake news stories. But here's what I think. I think the process of misinforming and misleading and deceiving and manipulating and outright lying has been going on for a very long time at the highest levels of society. And is it worse today? Probably. But the point I want to make is it's always been with us. And it's the media, and I'm not just talking about social media, I'm talking about news media as well, that's often the targeted transmission belt for the distorted messaging. And when you're trying to turn around a story in a matter of hours or a matter of minutes on multiple platforms, it's very difficult to verify the truth of assertions and claims. In 1991 in Canada, there were 13,000 reporters, okay? In our big country, 13,000 people who were identified on that census form as being a reporter. In the same year, there were about 24,000 people who worked in the public relations and communications field. So you had about 2 PR communications people per every reporter. That was in 1991. 30 years later, in 2021, the number of reporters has declined to about 11,000. And the number of public relations and communications people has increased to 160,000. Okay. Journalists in this room of my vintage remember the day when you could just pick up the phone and call a cabinet minister. Maybe that'll happen again now. I'm not sure. Will it, Mark? I don't know. What? Or a government department head or company owner and ask them a question. Today, PR and communications departments generally shield these people from the media, rarely granting in-person interviews and demanding that questions be emailed so that responses can be carefully massaged. Quebecor laid off 547 people. 1/3 of their entire workforce was laid off today. This is what's going on in the world of journalism in Canada these days. And traditional sources of revenue that used to fund newspapers and broadcast outlets have all declined. They've been drained off to the likes of Facebook and Google. And at the same time, there are more and more platforms to feed and more punishing 24-hour news cycles. It means reporters are being stretched to the limit. Now, one of the people I interviewed for my book is Alan Thompson. He's a former Toronto Star reporter. And he's currently head of the journalism department at Carleton University. This is what he told me, very interesting story. He ran for parliament once, or twice, I think. He didn't win, he was an unsuccessful candidate in Southern Ontario. But he said when no journalist showed up at some of his campaign announcements, he would write up a news story himself and send it to newspapers and media outlets, okay? And he said he told me he was astonished to find media outlets filing reports on his meetings with the only source being his press release, which they sometimes printed verbatim. And I loved what he told me, quote, "No one should ever run a press release issued by a political candidate. Remember, he was the candidate." In fact, when the PR industry succeeds in getting a journalist to amplify their message, they actually have a term for it. It's called earned media, coverage they didn't have to pay for. In my I have a chapter about the police in this book. And I talk about, for instance, how they have historically discounted and minimized crimes involving missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, always feeding media information that had the effect of blaming the victims themselves. We had the case here in Winnipeg last month of a 37-year-old Indigenous man who died as he was being arrested by Winnipeg police. And the chief of police actually lambasted the CBC for interviewing eyewitnesses to this event and trying to investigate what happened independently. And the chief insisted it's the police themselves who should control the narrative in such situations. If you don't believe me, go check his own Substack account. That is what he said. I make the case for less reliance on press releases and daily reactive reporting and greater emphasis on investigative work that tries to find out the truth of what's really going on, especially when it uses modern scientific tools of inquiry of the last few years to help journalists do their work. And I also call for journalism to thoroughly reject colonial stereotypes and racist and sexist prejudices, which have led to misleading and harmful coverage of many communities. I also encourage people to support the many exciting startup ventures in journalism that are doing good work, even as some of the conventional mainstream outlets are in decline. There's lots more I suggest could be done to improve the situation, but if I keep going, I'm afraid you're not going to buy my book. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.